On June 2, 1955, darkness swallowed the prison corridor in absolute silence. Only a dim, ethereal glow pierced the darkness, the flickering light from Barbara Graham's cell. She was awake, packing her bags for the final trip. The time served at the California Institution for Women in Corona has expired. She carefully packed her things: her red silk pajamas, bath powder box, favorite poetry book, tailor's suit, the shoes she wore to court, her wristwatch, and her wedding ring. The tiny traces of a life that no longer belonged to her. At 5:45 a.m., the guards escorted her out of her cell, handcuffed her into the backseat of the car, and began the long journey to San Quentin. The road stretched endlessly ahead, 10 hours traversing the arid, sun-baked landscapes of California. She was silent the whole way, lost in poetry. She accepted her fate with a strange silence. "You always hope," she told a reporter, "but if it is God's will that I die, then I will die. I am at peace." Barbara Graham, nicknamed Bloody Babs by the press, became one of the most notorious women in America. From a petty criminal, she transitioned to the position of a convicted murderer. She was sentenced to death for her role in the fatal attack on an elderly widow. The trial was a media frenzy, rife with betrayal, questionable testimony, and a frenzied press that painted her as a heartless femme fatale. In the 1950s, America was still fiercely debating the death penalty, especially when the subject was a woman. Since 1900, only 32 women have been executed in the United States, a rare number that makes each case a public sensation. Society at that time still held the prejudice that women had to be gentle and nurturing. So when a woman was convicted of murder, they were framed as monsters or devils. Barbara Graham was no exception. The media portrayed her as cold-blooded. But did they ever wonder about the traumatic past that led her down this path? The psychology of a condemned prisoner in their final hours is always a mix of fragile hope and inevitable acceptance. Barbara endured months of waiting, each day a struggle between life and death. Now, on the bus to San Quentin, she reads poetry, perhaps the only way her soul can find its final escape from the brutal reality that awaits. At 4 p.m., the wheelchair rolled through the gates of San Quentin. A crowd of reporters and photographers surrounded them. The press turned her into a brutal spectacle. 11 journalists secured positions to witness the execution, eager to capture the final moments of the woman they called Bloody Babs. She sat still, staring straight ahead, her gaunt face emphasized by a severe French twist hairstyle. Her eyes looked almost too big for her face. Perhaps out of self-respect or the quiet resilience of a woman in her final public appearance, she carefully applied eyebrow pencil and lipstick. As the car moved forward, she tried to force a weak smile. Warden Harley Teets met Barbara outside the North Seg unit, leading her to her cell, a nondescript cold box with a hard bed, a toilet, and a small shelf holding a radio. At his direction, a tarpaulin was spread over the gas chamber, shielding her from its grim shadow until the very last moment. He asked her what she wanted to eat. Anything she wanted. She refused. The only thing she consumed during the 10-hour drive from Corona was a milkshake. She was exhausted, her strength drained by the inevitable that awaited. Nurse Barbara Cates was sent to care for her. Later, Warden Teets admitted to reporters, "The poor girl, she was dying slowly." But he also admitted she still smiled when he asked her for a cigarette. The execution also weighed heavily on him. He had to oversee 3 that day. The gas chamber at San Quentin is not an unfamiliar tool. California began using gas chambers in 1938, replacing the traditional hanging method. It is considered more humane. Death comes quickly and painlessly. But that's just a painted lie. In fact, cyanide attacks the nervous system, blocking oxygen from reaching cells. Those who were executed often struggled, gasped for breath, and took 10 to 15 minutes to die completely. Witnesses often can't forget the scene, the sound of gasping breaths, convulsing bodies. Some police officers and reporters, after witnessing the execution, admitted they were haunted for weeks, even months. As night fell over San Quentin prison, Barbara changed into her red silk pajamas. A Catholic priest sat beside her, reading prayers, administering sacraments, and seeking any comfort that could be found in the quiet hours before the cyanide fell. The role of the priest in the final moments is always a delicate balance between faith and brutal reality. They couldn't promise earthly salvation, only offer prayers for the soul. For Barbara, a woman who had a traumatic childhood and a life full of sin, the priest brought a little peace before the door of death. Shortly after 10 p.m., attorney Al Matthews arrived at San Quentin with bad news. The California Supreme Court rejected Barbara Graham's final appeal, issuing a brief statement: "This order is final and effective immediately." Governor Goodwin Knight, after reviewing all records, reports, and petitions, also refused to intervene. "I find no basis for a pardon," he declared. However, the war is not officially over yet. Knight was still sitting at his desk, preparing for the wave of last-minute appeals that would flood the state's high court. A common occurrence in death penalty cases, but in a sensational case like Graham's, the stakes and emotions had never been higher. It began on June 3, 1955. Barbara Graham spent the entire night tossing and turning, smoking constantly, talking to nurse Barbara Cates, and letting classical music fill the silence of her cell. At one point, she sat down to write letters to lawyer Al Matthews and journalists, thanking them for their efforts on her behalf. Then, the news broke. A radio announcer declared that 4 couples had offered to adopt her son Tommy. That rumor is false, but just mentioning the child sent her into an emotional spiral. The nurse quickly switched the radio, trying to calm her down. As dawn approached, Barbara finally accepted a hot fudge sundae, but after a few bites, she pushed it aside. 15 minutes later, at 11:30 a.m., Barbara Graham walked out of her cell for the last time. She wore a mask, a white belt under her jacket, and walked with quiet determination. At the door of the execution chamber, Warden Teets gently patted her arm. "Goodbye and God bless you," he whispered. Inside, 40 people had gathered in the North Seg bunker: reporters, police officers, prison officials, and the 3 officers who helped convict her. Among them were those who came for duty, those who came out of curiosity, and those who carried a burden of conscience. A prison guard led her to a steel chair inside a closed chamber, which was placed in the center of a round room with thick windows where witnesses would observe. He tightened the thick leather straps around her arms, legs, and chest. He patted her arm lightly one last time and urged her to take a deep breath just as the cyanide capsule fell. When asked about her last words, Barbara's voice was steady and full of meaning. "Good people are always sure they're right." A short but bitter and defiant statement, as if she were questioning the very concept of justice that society confidently claims to uphold. At 11:34 a.m., the sealed door closed with a cold metallic clang. The executioner pulled the lever. The cyanide pellet fell into the acid tray. Toxic gas began to rise, a hazy, invisible but deadly breath. Barbara inhaled. Her head tilted back, then bowed. Her lips moved in silent prayer, perhaps the last words between her and God, if he was listening. But death didn't come as quickly as they promised. Her body twitched. Her head tilted back forcefully, her mouth open in panting breaths. This time, again and again, each breath is a struggle between life and death. Hydrogen cyanide attacks the central nervous system, blocking the cell's ability to absorb oxygen. The internal organs are still functioning, but there is no more oxygen to sustain life. The brain lacks oxygen, leading to seizures, irregular heartbeat, and the lungs trying to breathe but only receiving more toxic air. That's not a humane death. It's a slow, painful suffocation. At 11:41 a.m., Barbara was silent. A minute later, the prison doctor checked her with a stethoscope outside the gas chamber and declared her dead. 11:42 a.m. Barbara Graham is officially dead. Warden Harley Teets called it standard procedure. Journalist Gail Cook sees it differently. She died with great dignity. 11:42 a.m. That was her final death. But the other witnesses left in silence, their faces gray. Some couldn't eat for days. An officer later admitted, "I've seen many deaths, but that death, it haunts me." From 1900 to 1955, only 32 women were executed in the United States. Barbara Graham was one of them, but the question remains, did she really commit the crime? Her trial relied heavily on the testimony of John True, a criminal whose sentence was reduced in exchange for his incriminating testimony against her. There is no physical evidence connecting her to the crime scene, only words, and words can be bought, bent. The media had already painted her as Bloody Babs before the jury even reached a verdict. Public opinion had condemned her before the law did. Was she sacrificed to satisfy the public's thirst for justice? Are you really a cold-blooded killer who deserves to be punished? To this day, the question remains unanswered. Shortly after 9 a.m., Barbara Graham began preparing for her execution, still wearing her red silk pajamas and calmly brushing her hair. There's only 1 hour left until 10 a.m., the time she will die. But the ringing of the telephone suddenly shattered the silence. Warden Harley Teets announced, "The governor has ordered a temporary stay." "Does that mean I'll live?" she asked. "No," he replied. "The state Supreme Court has agreed to consider a last-minute appeal from attorney Al Matthews. The execution was postponed until 10:45 a.m. Matthews's appeal digs into a familiar argument, illegal wiretapping tainted Graham's trial. But this time, he had a new weapon, the verdict just weeks earlier in the case of People versus Cahan. In that case, the California Supreme Court overturned the conviction of a powerful Los Angeles gambling kingpin, ruling that evidence obtained through illegal searches and wiretaps could not be used in court. Matthews argues that the same principles should apply to Graham. The Cahan case was a turning point in California legal history, the first time the Supreme Court publicly acknowledged that citizenship rights cannot be sacrificed in the name of catching criminals. Governor Goodwin Knight admitted that a line from the Cahan ruling made him hesitate. The argument that unreasonable search and seizure is justified by the need to bring criminals to justice is unacceptable. But is that enough to save Barbara Graham? At 10:25 a.m., Barbara's last hope vanished. The court dismissed Al Matthews' appeal, ruling that People versus Cahan cannot be applied retroactively. 2 minutes later, Governor Goodwin Knight announced the news at a press conference. The execution continues. Barbara started getting ready. She changed her clothes carefully, brushed her hair, and applied lipstick with a steady hand. As she reached for the earrings, her fingers trembled, but she still put them on. Warden Harley Teets and 2 guards appeared, carrying a white mesh harness. "What's that for?" she asked, looking at it wearily. "That's a stethoscope," Teets explained. The belt was worn under her coat, connected to a rubber tube that extended outside the toxic vapor chamber, allowing doctors to determine the exact moment of her death without entering inside. Teets also held a mask at Graham's request. "I don't want to see anyone," she said. The mask is a relic from the era of hanging executions in California. When Teets asked her to take off her shoes, she forced a weak smile. "I look better with my shoes on." He allows it. 2 priests came to give her the last rites, placing a St. Jude medal around her neck. She tried to smile. "Thank you, that's a lovely farewell gift." The witnesses are present. 40 people gathered in the North Seg bunker, observing and waiting. As per your request, there are no family or friends among them. Barbara Graham was just a few steps away from leaving her cell when the phone rang again, another postponement. Matthews filed a last-ditch appeal, arguing that John True, one of the state's key witnesses, had lied. Barbara is exhausted. "Why are they torturing me like this?" she cried. "I'll be ready to go at 10 o'clock. She paced back and forth in the small cell, waiting. For Warden Teets, that day was an administrative and emotional nightmare. He had to coordinate 3 executions, Graham and the 2 robbers Jack Santo and Emmett Perkins, who were jointly convicted in the widow's murder. Each postponement prolongs the torture not only for the condemned, but also for those who have to witness it. At 11:15 a.m., the final words arrived. The court dismissed the appeal. There will be no more delays.